In fact, I would not be too harsh, I think, to describe that the police acted like terrorists on a few occasions in particular. For example, we talked about the 31st of August when riot police stormed into Prince Edward Mass Transit Railway Station and hit at people indiscriminately. And you know, by definition, if you hit people indiscriminately, that is really a terrorist act. And it has been rumored that people were killed on that occasion.
In the eyes of former Hong Kong lawmaker Alan Leong, what is the real significance of the recent district elections in Hong Kong, in which the pro-democracy camp won an unprecedented victory? Why is it in the self-interest of the US and liberal democracies worldwide to support the Hong Kong protesters? And how might the situation in Hong Kong foreshadow the future for the rest of the world if the situation in communist China isn't held in check? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jekielek. Today we sit down with Alan Leong, a preeminent figure for Hong Kong democracy. He ran for the position of Hong Kong's chief executive in 2007 and served on the Legislative Council for 12 years. In 2014, he helped lead the Umbrella Movement and currently serves as the chairman of the pro-democracy Civic Party. Alan Leong, wonderful to have you on American Thought Leaders.
My pleasure.
Or should I say Hong Kong Thought Leaders? So, Alan, you've just had an unprecedented election. I mean, I don't even know who expected something like this could happen, and you were in the thick of it. Tell us about what went down.
You must be referring to the district council elections, which took place in Hong Kong on the 24th of November. We had a record turnout of voters. This time round, we had 4.13 million registered as voters who are qualified to vote, and 71.5% of those actually came out to vote. That would make about 3 million. And it was for the first time ever in Hong Kong District Court Council elections that we had all 452 vacant seats that were up for grab contested.
Okay.
Each and every one. And the Democrats have been promoting this election as a de facto referendum on government's performance, particularly on how the CCP, through its agent, Carrie Lam, the chief executive in Hong Kong, has been treating the Hong Kong people in this freedom movement, which started about 6 months ago.
Okay.
And we say to the people, if you are telling Carrie Lam that she is not up to our expectations, and we want police brutality to be subject of an independent commission of inquiry, if you want to reform the police force so as to make us feel more safe, or if you want to redefine the freedom movement as a movement in which we are defending our core values, our human rights, freedom, rule of law, and way of life, and you want to say no to the CCP when it wants to impose upon us the mainland values, mainland institutions, and to convert one country, two systems into one country, one system, then come out and vote for the Democrats. Because in every contest in the 452 constituencies, we definitely offered a Democrat in each and every one of those constituencies. So if you go in and vote for the Democrats, you are voting for the package that I just described to you. And it was amazing that at the end of the day, the Democrats got 1.7 million votes out of the 3 million cast. And those who were pro-Beijing, pro-government, they added up to about 1.2 million. So the referendum effect was felt loudly and clearly, that people actually wanted one country, two systems. We want Carrie Lam to go. We want the police force to be reformed. We want an independent inquiry into police brutality, and we want to redefine the nature of this movement. When Beijing has wanted to call this a riot, and us rioters, we send a clear message to Beijing that you are wrong. We want to redefine this as a movement in defense of our way of life, freedom, liberties, human rights, and rule of law.
It's incredible. And when we were speaking earlier, you mentioned that people were coming from, Hong Kongers that were overseas were coming in just to cast a vote. There's just some incredible moments that you became aware of during the election.
Well, perhaps I can tell you a few different encounters during the day, 24th of November, which for me started at about 6:30 in the morning until past midnight, and the time that I hit my bed, it was already 5 a.m. the following day. So I was on the ground, on the move all the time, and I can tell you a few things that I encountered that left a mark with me. There were quite a few people that I bumped into who told me that they flew back all the way for the weekend to vote. They flew long haul from Toronto, New York, London, and from Paris, I think, one told me. And what is even more impressive is that they had to go back to where they came from to work on Monday morning. So they just flew in after work on Friday, cast a vote on Sunday, and then rushed to the airport in order to get back.
Because in Hong Kong, you have to be here on the ground to actually vote. Yeah.
Because in Hong Kong, no postal vote is allowed. So you have to be physically here to cast a vote. And secondly, there was a woman who told me in the most vivid way that I could actually feel how she had felt when she was casting the vote. She told me, Mr. Leong, I actually stared at the polling paper for as long as I would like to. And you know why? The police had their batons. I have this vote, this paper on which I can indicate how I dislike, how I am opposed to police brutality. So she described to me in the most vivid way how the polling paper could be used against the police batons. And I trust that this lady who told me this represented a lot of different people who cast their votes on Sunday. And I actually felt a sense of hope when you looked at people's faces. Now, in Hong Kong, we had not had smiling faces for the past 6 months.
Right.
But on that day, when I went inside tea houses to canvass votes for my party's candidates, I actually saw a lot of smiling faces. And they explained to me why they were happy. Because they told me, Mr. Leong, I already cast my vote. And I feel so good that I actually, by voting, manifested my opposition to the Carrie Lam regime, to the CCP, and to the police brutality that we have been suffering for the past 6 months. So that was what happened on the ground on Sunday.
It's an incredible thing, and you mentioned that this lady, she's very clear on the police behaving in these very extreme ways. We've seen this in the video and so forth. But my sense is even 6 months ago, Hong Kongers didn't have this sense of the police. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt there seemed to be more trust, seemingly at least, and that's things kind of devolved or went in a pretty horrible way over these 6 months. How is it in your mind that this happened, that the police ended up in this place where they're using violence, as far as it seems, to affect control and so forth?
In fact, I would not be too harsh, I think, to describe that the police acted like terrorists on a few occasions in particular. For example, we talked about the 31st of August, when riot police stormed into Prince Edward Mass Transit Railway Station and hit at people indiscriminately. And by definition, if you hit people indiscriminately, that is really a terrorist act. And it has been rumored that people were killed on that occasion. But of course, the police denied it. There were still many holes in the CCTV records that we can't really tell for sure whether there were people killed on that occasion. And there was another occasion in Yuen Long MTR station where we have thugs, mob, rushing into the mass transit railway station, hitting at commuters indiscriminately. But the police were conspicuously absent. In fact, 2 police officers who patrolled past that spot were caught on camera to have left the scene.
While this was happening,
Before it happened. In fact, before it happened, when the mob and the thug were gathering outside the station and shouting, threatening that it would be going in with pipes and rattan rods, etc., they walked away. So, you see, it was an accumulation of these images and incidents that discredited the police. On top of that, there were disparity of treatments between protesters on the one hand and the police on the other. I think the world has seen images of police using their batons, beating very hardly on people who had been subdued,
right,
with nothing to hand to hit the police or to bring danger to the police, yet they were hit. And we saw images of young ladies being dragged along on the street, down staircases, by their hair. They were pulled by their hair and dragged along. Now, these images ought never to have happened in a place as civilized as Hong Kong, and also a place that is known to have been observing the rule of law. Now, how can you, on the one hand, not doing anything to curb police brutality, while on the other hand, you prosecuted people for riots when we were just out there to defend our human rights, freedom, and the rule of law? A lot of disparities in treatments there, and you see the rule of law as an institution will be seriously harmed by such disparity of treatment, because it is really crucial for people to perceive that no matter who you are, whether you are a police officer or you are just an ordinary citizen,
Right.
so long as you breach the law, you will be treated the same way. But no, you probably remember that one police officer who actually pointed a gun at short range at protesters he was invited to Beijing on the 1st of October to actually participate in the parade in Tiananmen on 1st of October. You see, all the wrong messages were sent to Hong Kong and to the world. That's why police brutality has become the focus of the movement since about July.
So, and this is actually quite interesting because you mentioned, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party's kind of role earlier as we were discussing, and this is kind of I don't know if it's quite anymore the unseen force kind of behind the scenes, inviting this police officer to Beijing. That's a fascinating story. There's been this, erosion of the rule of law and the freedoms that have been enjoyed in Hong Kong over the last, quarter century, I guess, right? Can you speak to that a little bit and how that, how that manifested in the current situation with the police?
Well, you see, one thing that the British, as colonial masters of Hong Kong for over 1.5 centuries, had left us this legacy. The most important thing of this legacy, of the British legacy, is the rule of law. And this, as an institution, has been tarnished, damaged to such an extent that when I was visiting Europe in my recent trip, some parliamentarians in London actually suggested that perhaps they would stop sending their top judges to Hong Kong to serve as non-permanent judges of the Court of Final Appeal, because they do not want to lend their weight to credit the Court of Final Appeal. And of course, I was telling them, well, their top judges are like canaries in a coal mine. And if they withdraw all their top judges, you are like signing a death certificate for Hong Kong's rule of law. And I appealed to them to perhaps give us a chance for us to demonstrate to the world that we are still trying the hardest to sustain the rule of law as the world knows about it. And do you want me to tell you more about my trip I just touched on?
Oh, no, please go ahead, because I remember we were chatting a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
You also mentioned that you've been doing these trips for a while,
Yeah.
and your experiences with them have changed.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
Yeah.
After I had run for the chief executive in 2007, I started getting invitations to visit legislatures of liberal democracies, think tanks, civil society organizations. And I have been telling our friends of the free world about how the CCP has been infiltrating into our different institutions and how the CCP has been using our rules of the games to actually work against us. How they buy up media organizations, how they try to change the syllabuses of our schools in order to brainwash our next generations, how they are replacing the top management of many of our corporations, financial institutions with mainlanders and all these. But 10 years ago, what I said seemed to have fallen on deaf ears.
Okay.
I dare to say that had they listened to me earlier on, they might not have ended up where they are now. It may be a bit unkind for me to tell this to our friends in liberal democracies, but what I actually told them to their face was, you are finding yourselves in today's dire situation, not because of anybody else, but you have only yourselves to blame. When the CCP got admitted into the World Trade Organization 18 years ago, liberal democracies supported it with the thinking that by engaging the CCP in trade and business, it would lure it into adopting the rules-based order of the game. But, well, that being the original thinking, nobody was there to police compliance by the CCP of those rules of the WTO, and nobody was there to hold CCP to its bargains, terms of which were contained in international treaties, in the WTO documents, etc. So I was telling our friends in liberal democracies that if you do not try to rectify this now, given, say, a decade more, you will find yourself to be completely helpless and you would be at CCP's mercy. And this giant had been actually fed by you, nurtured by you, by your not insisting on doing business with the CCP on your terms. I'm not saying that you should not be doing business with the CCP at all. Well, after all, China market consists of 1.4 billion people.
Right.
But there is nothing wrong with you insisting on the CCP's compliance with all the rules and promises, like opening up the Chinese market. It will become a competitive market. You will observe all the rules of the WTO and all the obligations and duties that you are supposed to have taken on at the time of your accession to WTO. And I actually put it on the basis that Hong Kong being a member and your ally in liberal democracies, if we go down in our defense of freedom, liberties, rule of law, human rights, and way of life, it is so symbolic that it will be used by the CCP in its rhetoric about one day the China model will take over and prevail over liberal democracies.
You know, Alan, it's kind of crazy, but I've been hearing this kind of stuff. There's big, there's billionaires in the U.S., big hedge fund people that kind of believe this, that there's this inevitability of the CCP model, taking over the world, and we better get in with the game while it's good. What does that sound like to you?
Well, I described to our friends in liberal democracies during my visits that what President Xi Jinping had been preaching to the world is like a spell of inevitability. The rhetoric is simple, that the China model is superior, and one day it is inevitable that it will prevail over liberal democracies.
So that's the authoritarian model, basically.
That's right. But to me, what the China model is really an authoritarian or even dictatorial regime delivering only on the economy, but would not allow people to enjoy any freedom, liberties, or human rights. Particularly assisted by this AI technology, facial recognition,
Right.
etc. It is very, very effective or efficient an authoritarian regime. To some who are in politics in liberal democracies, this may be very attractive. But it is against human rights. It is against the freedom that we all are born to love, you see. So I'm telling liberal democracies that you are not helping Hong Kong to fight against authoritarianism, dictatorship. You are at the same time helping yourselves. It may be a bit late, but it's better late than never. If you leave it even later, then you may have gone past a point of no return. And we, in this world's history, had witnessed USSR. If you allow the CCP to grow into something like the USSR, then you have to wait until it rots from within before you can end your agony. And that could be a very long wait, particularly with this facial recognition and AI technology, you see?
Right.
So I've been telling people that you have to watch Hong Kong. And by looking at what is happening in Hong Kong on the ground during, in particular, the past 6 months, you will actually be seeing your future. If you do not act now, what Hong Kong experienced and went through in the freedom movement during the last 6 months could easily be your fate in the future. So it is, to put it shortly, today's Hong Kong can be the world's tomorrow if you do not act now to try to avert this course. But what I'm suggesting is simple. So far as Hong Kong is concerned, hold China, CCP, to its promises under the Sino-British Joint Declaration and the Basic Law. What we are asking in this freedom movement are not things that we dream about recently. They were all things promised us by the CCP in the Basic Law, and they are supposed to deliver. If the CCP is to earn the trust and confidence of the world so that it will become a serious player respected by liberal democracies, well, this is the litmus test. Well, hold CCP to the Basic Law and to the Southern British Joint Declaration, if it can or is prepared to deliver according to these documents, well, then you can start to have some basis to trust CCP and continue to work with it.
So speaking of liberal democracies, today is a kind of auspicious day. It's Thanksgiving in America. And just yesterday, President Trump signed these couple of Hong Kong-related bills that near unanimously were passed through both houses of Congress. About as strong a sign of support as you could get, I think, from both the Congress and the administration. What do you think of the significance of this is for Hong Kong? How does this play out?
Well, it is sort of sad that we need international support to sustain our freedom, liberties, human rights, rule of law, and way of life. But however sad that may be, that seems to be the only way out. Now, Hong Kong, in my analysis, is still indispensable to the CCP. 2/3 of direct foreign investment into the country goes through Hong Kong annually, and we are the single largest forex market in which renminbi can be converted into other world currencies. You see, if Hong Kong no longer sustains our position as an international financial center, who is there to play this role for the CCP? So I think the passage of the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act by the Congress and signed by the President really hits the nail on its head. The Secretary of State and the Department of Commerce are supposed to be performing a health check on Hong Kong at least every year.
Right.
So that if Hong Kong is no longer the Hong Kong anticipated by the 1992 Hong Kong Policy Act, then Hong Kong will easily lose our status as an independent custom territory. Then we would probably lose our status as international financial center, no longer trusted by liberal democracies of the world. And this threat of losing Hong Kong, I hope, will be able to keep the CCP under check. Particularly, I have noted that Holland and also Canada have followed the American lead already, that they have already passed something similar to the American Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. So it is in this way that liberal democracies of the world can help Hong Kong to defend the common core values we share and also the common institutions implemented both in Hong Kong and in other liberal democracies. And we are ready and prepared to share with liberal democracies our experience in dealing with CCP over the past quarter of a century, if not longer. And I think by their sacrifices, young men and women who lost their career and even their lives during the past 6 months are here to be remembered, that they put Hong Kong in the world's focus, and Hong Kong has moved and touched the hearts of millions in liberal democracies. And these peoples, they will speak to their own governments, their politicians, their presidents, their prime ministers, that they would not want to end up like Hong Kongers today. Now, that will be a very forceful directive to politicians in these democratic systems to actually cooperate amongst themselves to devise a strategy and tactics and policy to deal with CCP. And by doing so, you will be helping Hong Kong immediately to defend the same values and institutions. At the same time, you are also helping yourselves.
I wanted to talk a little bit about, so there's been these encroachments, the CCP on rule of law and freedom of the press, the Epoch Times, you've probably heard the thugs came and tried to burn the press. There's been a lot of, paid propaganda on the front pages of Hong Kong papers. I remember seeing that one day after one of the university protests, sort of front pages hidden with communist propaganda. What do you make of this, kind of encroachment on freedom of the press? Are you seeing that as I am, or?
Well, I think the most vivid way to see the encroachment on press freedom is that reporters who were reporting from the front line during the past 6 months, they were seriously injured. One Indonesian journalist had one of her eyes hit by police, I think, a rubber bullet, and she lost that eye. And frontline reporters were hit from behind by police using gun. All these are totally unacceptable. And I think the Hong Kong Journalists Association and International Journalists Association already spoke up on these police behavior. And but sadly, the fact is, many of our newspapers and also a leading free TV station are now bowing to Beijing. And,
oh, really?
And and they actually carry very biased reports on what is happening on the ground during the past 6 months freedom movement. So things are not looking that good on the front of journalistic freedom. But again, I think we must be very thankful to the men and women who are in journalism to have been trying their best to cover all these things while they were happening on the ground, so that the world and Hong Kong people will see them.
Well, so you have our promise from the Epoch Times that we will keep doing that, whatever it takes. Another question I have, you've been practicing law here for decades, in Hong Kong, and so there's this mask ban that came out, and then, as a testament to rule of law existing, the High Court, I think, deemed it unconstitutional. But then we heard rumblings from Beijing, maybe this isn't the final word. So can you break that down a little bit?
Now, in fact, when Hong Kong reverted to Chinese sovereignty in 1997, Hong Kong people were very anxious and worried that we would one day be subjected to the same legal system that dealt with the Nobel Prize laureate Liu Xiaobo. So at that time, we were promised that there would be a firewall constructed between these two systems, so that we would never be required to go back to the mainland to stand trial, be sentenced, and to serve our prison term there. And not only that, but we have the basic law to provide that all the laws existing in Hong Kong prior to 1997 would continue to apply,
Okay.
at least until the year 2047. And there would be interpretation by the National People's Congress Standing Committee in the name of legislative interpretation, but it would only be invoked upon request of our Chief Justice over matters not within Hong Kong's autonomy.
Okay.
Now, so that was the understanding, and we trusted that to continue to apply at least until 2047. But since 1997, it seems that the CCP has forgotten all about these promises made to Hong Kong a quarter of a century ago. For example, we have the CCP interpreting the Basic Law on 5 occasions after 1997. On 4 of those occasions, lawyers marched our streets dressed in black in protest because those 4 occasions were not anticipated as I just described to you. They were not invoked by the Chief Justice. They were invoked by either Beijing or Hong Kong's Chief Executive to serve political purposes.
Right.
And we had the example of the high-speed rail terminus in West Kowloon. 2 floors of that terminus are carved out and become mainland territory in this sense that mainland law enforcement officers would be on duty there and to practice and to implement mainland Chinese laws over those 2 floors. And another obvious example is that Article 22 of the Basic Law provides for non-interference by the Central People's Government of matters within Hong Kong's autonomy. But now, the director of the Central People's Government's representative office in Hong Kong has his finger in almost every pie, right? Okay. Like calling up legislators, dictating to them how they should vote in politically charged and very sensitive resolutions.
Okay.
Now, so in short, what we have witnessed in the past 22 years is that the CCP has been treacherously breaching its promises contained in the Sino-British Joint Declaration and the Basic Law. I quite like one statement fallen from the last governor, Chris Patten.
Okay.
Mr. Patten actually said, it is now quite evident that the CCP, in making treaties or agreements, they were not meant for compliance by themselves, but only by the other party who signed those treaties and agreements. It seems that from the experience that Hong Kong has had in the first 22, 23 years of reversion of sovereignty, that statement has its weight.
It's incredible when you put it that way. So this is really just this, and kind of potential reversal of this anti-mask ruling is just sort of the next step in a progression of the erosion of these basic freedoms and rule of law, basically.
And it is really because of the feeling of this threat that Hong Kongers can no longer feel assured that we must not be sent back to the mainland for trial, to be sentenced, and to serve our prison term there, that triggered this freedom movement. Right? Because Carrie Lam, half a year ago, introduced an amendment bill into the Legislative Council. In short, in our analysis, to remove the firewall
Right.
that we have been promised.
Exactly.
And Hong Kongers suddenly seem to have been dawned to this treacherous breach of the basic law by the CCP. And it is like the last straw that breaks the camel's back. And that, in fact, is the fuel that has kept the freedom movement going for the past 6 months, notwithstanding the escalation of violence used by protesters on the front line.
So, Alan, we've had this incredible election, with almost 3/4 of the voters coming out. It feels like a little calmer. I've only been here a few days now, but certainly from what I've heard from our staff here, it has been calm since. Just to finish up, what are your expectations?
I think one thing to take away from the district council elections on 24th of November is that Hong Kong people continues to be that very peaceful, rational, civic-minded, and capable of exhibiting the highest of citizen quality that you know about. On the election day, I saw happy faces that I have not seen for the past 6 months, simply because Hong Kongers are seeing some hope in the casting of their votes and to have their opinions counted and quantified. Now, this is really the perfect moment for those in power to mend the wide gap between the two ends of society. The views are very polarized. Some families are divided that children would not go home for dinner. They have not seen their parents for 6 months. So this is time because either side, I mean those at either ends, two ends of the polls, now know that the other side has really significant number in support. You have 1.2 million against 1.7 million. While the 1.2 million who are pro-government is in the minority, but they are still in very significant number. So it is time, I think, that whether you are in the 1.2 million or amongst the 1.7 million, you would be more agreeable to listen to what the other camp has to say. The numbers are already scientifically quantified, so you know you are not really in a minority of 1, or you are in the majority of 3 million. So there is this golden opportunity to mend this divide. But what is very, very frustrating is that it doesn't seem that Carrie Lam is seizing upon this opportunity. From the way that she has spoken after the conclusion of the general elections, she seemed to be telling the world that the elections were not about her or her administration. It was simply an election to return district councillors who would serve in the 18 different districts. But that is far off the mark. So I hope that somebody would be able to talk some sense to Carrie Lam so that she can seize of this opportunity to react to the situation. The way that I see it is probably she should resign, and the acting chief executive would then come in and appoint an independent commission of inquiry, promising that there would be the redefinition of this freedom movement from being a riot to a campaign that defends our core values. And there would be the start of some negotiations for genuine universal suffrage to be introduced as soon as practicable. So this is the opportunity, but somebody has to seize upon it and do something.
Alan, what a powerful place to finish up. Wishing the best of success to all the people of Hong Kong and to yourself. Thank you.
My pleasure.